It's Children's Mental Health Week, and we're exploring the power of paying attention to what's going on inside, discovering clues from our thoughts, our feelings, and our bodies. Hello, I'm Kathryn Lovewell, author of the Inner Detective Journal, a gentle guide to help young children make sense of their inner world, especially when life feels difficult. We are shining a light on the importance of children's mental health so every child has the opportunity to learn skills to respond to themselves kindly when things go wrong, which they inevitably will. So let's hear from one of our special guests now. Welcome, everyone. It's Kathryn Lovewell here from Kind Mind Academy, sharing with you another brilliant interview with the amazing Dr. Karen Bluth, Professor Emerita from the University of North Carolina and adjunct professor at Assumption University. Karen, thank you so much for being here today. I'm very excited to celebrate Children's Mental Health Week with you.
I'm so happy to be here, Kathryn. Thank you for having me.
Well, I know that we could talk and talk and talk about the importance of mental health for our children and young people. But first of all, let's help anyone that's watching today understand, well, what does children's mental health actually mean? What does it mean to you? And then we'll dive into the challenges that our children and youth are facing.
Yeah, well, we know that children's mental health has not been great recently and has taken a downward turn in the last decade or so, decade and a half. What does it mean to me? When kids are happy and not anxious or sad or depressed, when they're able to cope with the normal kinds of daily challenges that come up in life without too much struggle. I mean, that's what healthy mental health or positive mental health looks like. There are always going to be challenges. There's always going to be obstacles to overcome for not just for kids and youth, but for adults also. That's part of life. But to be able to do that with, wisely and with minimum struggle, to be able to move through them and be resilient. That's what positive mental health looks like.
Fantastic. Thank you. So you've been working with young people for a very long time, both teaching and then developing some mindful self-compassion for teens programs. You've done tons of research around this. What are the problems that you are encountering with the teens that you're working with? What sort of things are they needing support with?
Well, we know anxiety is very high, particularly depression is also really high. And importantly, teens don't seem to have great coping mechanisms to deal with those kinds of challenges. And I also want to point out that this world that they are living in, that we're all living in, is difficult, has a lot of challenges. It's not an easy world to navigate right now for many, many reasons. And so, when you put kids into this world and without really giving them guidance on how to develop these coping skills, they struggle. They struggle.
Yeah. And what would you say, we're wanting to share with everyone that we have this in a quick plug in a detective journal. So when I'm talking with my little ones, I say, where are the clues? What are the clues that help you understand or help you see that maybe there's some tricky thoughts in there, or maybe, the body gives signals? What are the signs and symptoms that the teens notice in themselves when they are starting to struggle?
Yeah, I think teens are pretty aware that they're struggling. The teens that I speak with, when I just start to bring up these things, there's a flood of, oh yeah, I get really, really anxious about taking tests, or I get really anxious when I have to get up in front of the class and talk about anything, or no, I can't do that. I can't do that particular activity. It just brings me too much anxiety. So they're quite aware of what they're feeling, and often, most of the time, when it arises, teens feel things very deeply. And yeah, they're pretty aware of how they're feeling. And like I said, they don't necessarily have the tools to navigate that, to work with that, to work through that. unfortunately.
And of course, this is where your brilliant work comes in. I had the pleasure of training with Karen many years ago for the Mindful Self-Compassion for Teens program, and have admired your work and all the incredible things and the resources. I'm so passionate about resourcing our children and young people so they feel they have agency over their lives, that they feel empowered and they have self-determination. So can you talk to us a little bit about some of the resources, the skills, the tools that you're offering our.
Yeah, well, the big one that we've just developed in the past year is a website. And this website is specifically for teens to learn about self-compassion. So we knew that although we've had this program for a long time for teens to teach teens about self-compassion, a lot of teens don't have access to that program, but they do have access to the internet. So we've developed a website where teens can go and learn about self-compassion. There's a lot of short videos there, videos like what is self-compassion. There's a quiz that teens can take to find out how self-compassionate they are. This is a quiz from research. There's stories of teens who have taken our self-compassion courses and learned about self-compassion and talking about their own experiences. The website is selfcompassionforteens.org. And so that's the big thing that we have. And that's the one that's really the most accessible. Like I said, we also have an 8-week program for teens that we've trained probably over 400 teachers in internationally at this point who are teaching our 8-week program. We also have a 16-week program where the classes are shorter. So in the 8-week program, the classes are an hour and a half. In the 16-week program, the classes are half that length, 45 minutes. And we have published that 16-week curriculum in a book called Mindful Self-Compassion for Teens. And there are other books also that I've published and that other people have published on just talking about what self-compassion is, what are the tools to become more self-compassionate, and which means more kind and supportive to yourself when you're struggling. When you're struggling, what can you do to help yourself get through? How can you support yourself? And yeah, so there's quite a lot of tools out there right now.
It's really, really exciting to know that they can have direct access to learning these skills. If you were to share with anyone watching that maybe they have a son or daughter that is struggling, or maybe there's a young person in their family or in their learning environment that they know is struggling, what sort of first steps would you offer them, suggest to them in this self-compassionate journey? How do they even begin? Because many people that I talk to, when I mention self-compassion, they say, self what? They just, they're just like, well, what's that? It's almost sort of this alien thing. And in our culture, I think there's a lot of myths about what they think it might be. And maybe we do need to do some myth busting about that. But what would be the first steps? How would you help a young person that is struggling with those first steps of bringing a little bit more kindness to themselves, especially when they're struggling with things like anxiety or depression?
Mhm. Yeah, well, in order to really share it with the youth around you in your life, you really have to know what it is. And so, really, the first step is to learn something about self-compassion for yourself. And so learning what it is, learning what the tools are for adults, which isn't very different than the tools for teens, so that you really have a good understanding of its benefits and how it works for you. Because really the way that kids learn is through watching the adults around them. And teens may look like they're not watching their parents or they're not watching the adults, but they are. And we know that. So, to learn about self compassion for yourself, there's a lot of resources out there. In particular, Kristen Neff's website, selfcompassion.org, has a ton of great information on it to learn about self-compassion. Yeah, that would be the first step. And then you can start to model self-compassion. So, for example, you make a mistake, rather than getting down on yourself and criticizing yourself and saying, "Oh, I'm such an idiot. That was so dumb. Why did I do that?" You can say something that's more self-compassionate, that's kinder to yourself. Like, "Wow, I really have a lot on my mind. I have so much going on right now. Such a big day at work. I'm just really overwhelmed. Likely that's why I made that mistake. I'm going to sit down and take a couple of breaths, and then I can go on and correct my mistake. And if you do that, the teens or the kids or, people around you will see that and say, oh, okay. All right. That's what she's doing.
That's a different way of handling the burnt dinner or the being late for a meeting or, the washing all turning pink because someone's put a red jumper in it. And you're absolutely right. That whole sense of, well, can I model being a friend to myself first? Can I
Right.
share those skills out? And I'm big on the out loud thing, be explicit. This is really hard.
And it's really so it changes the whole way you can frame making a mistake. So now when you make a mistake, if you go in with that attitude when you make a mistake, it's a great learning opportunity for the kids around you, for the teens around you. You can, and I'll give you an example from my own life. Some years ago, I was teaching a class on self-compassion, and I had forgotten to turn my phone off before class, and my phone rang in the middle of class. So instead of, like ignoring it or, making some excuse or being defensive about it or whatever, I just said, look, I made a mistake and I have a choice right now. I can either beat myself up and say something to myself like, I should know better. I've been teaching for a long time. I should have turned off the phone. That was really stupid of me. Or another way of relating to yourself is saying something like, yeah, I made a mistake. I'm going to make a note for myself next time, or I'm going to put a note on my phone or on my desk or wherever to remind myself to turn off the phone because I'm human and humans make mistakes and it happens and I don't have to beat myself up. So it's a great opportunity to do that in the classroom. Yeah.
So
That's what I
different,
do.
isn't it? And I think we're in a culture that it's cross-culturally, this whole beating ourselves up has become the norm. And, we've got to beat ourselves up. And if otherwise we won't be motivated. And we've got to beat ourselves up if we're going to be the best at anything. And yet, tell us about the research, Karen.
Yeah, so we know from lots of research at this point that teens who are kinder to themselves, who are more self-compassionate, have less anxiety, depression, and stress, and also are more able to try new things, to move outside of their comfort zone and try a new sport or try a new craft or, push themselves a little bit, embrace new experiences. And we know that teens who are more self-compassionate are less likely to self-injure when they're depressed. They're less likely to get depressed when they're stressed. We know that as teens get older and move through adolescence, they tend to get more depressed. That's driven more by females than by males. But teens who are more self-compassionate are less likely to get depressed as they get older. They're less likely to get stressed when they're faced with academic challenges. And this research comes from studies all that were conducted all over the world. So
I'm interested in
cross-culturally.
failure, Karen. Sorry, jumping in there, just as it fits together. There's an interesting dynamic around failure, certainly in the UK. In the UK education system, we're not set up to fail. We're not allowed to fail anymore. It's a very bad thing to fail, even though that's obviously, I believe, how we learn and grow. If you're more self-compassionate, what happens when it comes to dealing with failure?
Yeah, well, when if you're more self-compassionate, when you fail or you make a mistake, rather than saying to yourself, "I'm a failure," I'm never going to be successful. What you say to yourself, well, maybe that wasn't either I wasn't applying myself as well as I could, or maybe that's just not the right thing for me, or maybe there's a different approach that I can take. What we know from the research is that kids and adults who are more self-compassionate don't beat themselves up as much when they fail. And for that reason, can more easily embrace new experience and take positive risks. Yeah.
So their bounce back ability, their resilience, their ability to say, okay, well, I'll give that a go again. Or, all right, what can I learn from that horrible experience? That felt really difficult. It's stronger. There's that sense of inner strength.
Right. And also because they know that this is human to make mistakes. This is human to fail. Oh, it's not unique to you. It doesn't mean that you are particularly some anomaly and some, strange weirdo failure person. That this is part of the human experience. We all fail at some point or another, and sometimes often. And it's a great, as you said, it's a great opportunity to learn and to say, okay, how can I do it differently next time?
It's a very, very different approach to getting the stick out and beating ourselves up with it, that we need to do better and we're not okay just as we are. We need to, yeah, because that's so painful and we know it just escalates and obviously then leads to real struggles with mental health. So I know that everyone watching will want us to continue for the rest of the evening, but I ought to draw all these threads together, I think, for now. One final word of guidance, suggestion for any young person watching this, or maybe someone that cares for a young person. If they're struggling, what would you say? What would you say to them?
Yeah, well, two things come to mind. One is that you matter and the world needs you, and the world needs your unique presence. And also, the other thing that comes to mind is that it doesn't have to be this hard. You don't have to struggle this much, that there are that there are ways, there are skills, there are tools that you can learn that can make your life easier, so you don't have to, it just doesn't have to be this hard.
Beautiful. Thank you so much. Dr. Kathryn Bluth has so much experience. I cannot encourage you too much to go and have a look at that website, to go and read her books, to learn about all the incredible work and research that she's done. I'm obviously a big advocate of this self-compassionate approach. It changes the way our children and young people approach and relate to themselves and to the struggles that they will inevitably experience. Thank you so much for sharing all your expertise and time with us today. Really appreciate it.
Well, it was my pleasure to be here, Catherine. Thanks so much for inviting me.
If you found this curious conversation helpful, the Inner Detective Journal might be just what you need. It's a gentle, powerful way to help young children build lifelong coping skills with kindness from within. Click the link to get your copy for your child, your class, maybe your entire organization if they've got children, so you can help them through the tough times. Let's keep listening and keep supporting children's mental health together.